I never thought I'd be the one to put my foot down in our friend group, but here I am, standing on a precipice of sorts, caught between loyalty and discomfort. I'm Sarah, and I've been friends with Mike, Jess, and Clara for over a decade, since our awkward high school days. We've shared everything from triumphs to heartbreaks, always finding solace in each other's company, until house rules turned the company into a battlefield. It all started when we began hanging out at Mike's place more frequently. At first, it felt like an extension of our usual get-togethers, filled with laughter and shared snacks. But then, as the weeks turned to months, I started noticing little things: the strict silence during movie nights unless you had a comment worthy of praise, the way he would glance at his watch if someone went over their allowed time in the bathroom, and the unsolicited critique of how my coffee preference was too frivolous for an adult. It bugged me more than I wanted to admit, but I convinced myself it was just his quirk, something we could laugh about later. However, as the restrictions mounted, no arguing over board games, no using your phone unless it was for him, I began to see the cracks in our camaraderie. Jess and Clara were as uncomfortable as I was. I remember one night, sitting on the sagging couch, the air thick with tension as Mike launched into another diatribe about etiquette, and I felt my heart racing. After a particularly stifling evening, I brought it up to the group. "Do you think we should say something?" I asked, my voice carrying a hint of hesitance. Clara chewed her lip, glancing at Jess, who nodded slowly. We weren't mad at Mike for being himself, we just didn't want to live under a magnifying glass that forced us to tiptoe through every gathering. That's when I suggested we take a break from his house, for our own sanity, really. It's not about excluding him, it's about preserving what we've built together, I argued. They agreed, albeit hesitantly, and we decided to meet at Jess's place instead. The first time we did it, there was a relief that washed over us like an unexpected breeze. We chatted freely, erupted in laughter without checking the clock, and the pulse of our friendship returned. But, of course, Mike found out. I still remember the way his face twisted when he confronted me, hurt spilling out of his eyes like an open wound. "So, you don't want to hang out at my place anymore?" he asked incredulously, and I felt the guilt creep in. "It's not that, it's just..." I stumbled, realizing how fragile friendships can be. Our conversations became a series of circular debates after that, like two opposing trains on the same track. I didn't want to hurt him but felt compelled to stand my ground. Over the weeks that followed, the group dynamic shifted. While Jess and Clara enjoyed the newfound freedom, I found myself stuck in a loop of guilt and worry. What if we ended up pushing him away entirely? That thought haunted me, casting a shadow over our fun times. We tried inviting him to join us, but he'd show up with an attitude. It was just off. Little jabs, remarks about our advanced carefree spirit, and things that made it clear he was petulant over our decision. I wanted to talk him into understanding that it wasn't about him, it was about the environment. Yet, every time I opened my mouth, words felt inadequate. The tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Some nights, lying in bed, I thought about how friendships evolve. I wondered if I had crossed a line, whether I truly was the asshole. In my heart, I wanted to say no. I believe compromise is part of any relationship, but I never had the guts to confront Mike again, fearing it would unravel the fragile thread holding us together. Looking back now, I realize it took months of distance for us to finally communicate properly. We met up again for coffee, at a neutral spot because the house rule debates just got way too heavy, but this time, the walls were down. We could finally talk about how our friendship had changed without the pressure of the rigid rules. There was still hurt, okay, a lot of hurt, but also a willingness to listen. We discussed boundaries, about what felt comfortable, and, strangely enough, Mike confessed how much he feared being left out. Somehow, through all the misunderstandings, we found common ground. It's a messy process, friendships, but I think we're on the way back to being whole again, or at least learning how to navigate this new chapter together. One thing's for sure, though, I'd never advocate for ghosting a friend over house rules again. As I sit here reflecting on all that's happened, the weight of that weekend is still with me, heavy yet oddly uplifting. I thought letting go of the rigid house rules would lead us to a happier place, but seeing how it unraveled initially had me questioning my instincts. The truth is, Mike's home had always been our sanctuary, a gathering spot where laughter echoed late into the night. But it was also a space where unspoken tension lingered, hovering above us like a dark cloud just waiting to rain. When I encouraged the group to rethink our visits, stating that the rules about food and drinks, even how we talked around certain topics, were stifling, I felt more like a provocateur than a friend trying to protect our dynamic. When we finally confronted Mike together, it felt like peeling back layers we'd been adding to ourselves over the years. Words flowed as we sat in the living room, the familiar walls lined with photos of memories that now felt tainted by our recent rifts. I watched as Mike's face shifted from hurt to confusion and then slowly to realization. I could see that we weren't just addressing rules, we were unpacking insecurities and meticulously wrapping each other in empathy. The feeling of isolation I'd sensed in him, an atmosphere thick enough to choke on, dissolved into light when he shared that he feared being left out, that he'd built those rules as a safeguard but had instead trapped himself in us. When we spoke about boundaries, I felt a sense of catharsis. It was remarkably humbling to see Mike's vulnerability wash over him like a tide, and I reflected on how often I'd felt the same dread of being uninvited or merely ignored. There was a rawness to those conversations that left us breathless, yet relieved in an odd way, like a storm finally clearing. One by one, we shared our own burdens, the little things that built up over time, creating resentment. A sense of understanding formed between us, like an invisible bond tightening with each confession. By the end of our heart-to-heart, we dismantled the fear-based structure of our friendship to make room for something more authentic. Though there was still a long way to go, hurts can be stubborn like weeds in a garden, we promised to work through them together, to navigate this way forward like a group of explorers hunting for new paths in familiar woods. I might not have all the answers, but one thing became abundantly clear: I didn't want to lose our connection over something so fundamental as house rules, which, when you peel back the layers, stemmed from fears both spoken and unspoken. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. One evening, as we gathered at the park, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting golden rays over our small assembly of blankets and snacks, I could hear their laughter, a sound that had felt distant for so long. There was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease, and for a moment, I let myself be fully present, breathing it all in. As we passed around a shared bowl of popcorn, Mike looked around and broke the comfortable silence. "You know," he said, tossing a kernel into his mouth, "I had this idea that all of you were ganging up on me when you started coming over less often. I thought I was the nuisance." His laughter was half-hearted, but it kicked off a cascading effect, each of us nodding along as we revealed our own misunderstandings, our own doubts that had turned into insecurities. It turned into a revelation, a realization that we were all human, each guarding things that shouldn't be bottled up. I remember feeling a swell of gratitude wash over me, realizing that this group could survive the rough patches, that we could be honest without fear of judgment. It felt oddly cathartic, acknowledging those feelings rather than letting them fester. Then Christine, who had been mostly quiet, chimed in with a shaky but determined voice. "We've all felt anxious about something, haven't we? Whether it's about being too clingy, or feeling like we don't belong." The honesty hung in the air, a unifying thread that wove us closer. I saw lighter sparks in their eyes, each of us willing to step outside our comfort zones for the sake of our friendship. I felt lighter too. Maybe this was how growth looked, sometimes jagged, sometimes beautiful. The next week, we organized a board game night, a perfect excuse to hang out without the shadows of rules hanging overhead. We laughed, we argued over game pieces, and at one point, Mike playfully accused me of cheating, but instead of letting it spiral into an argument, I laughed it off. "Okay, guilty as charged." Then we both burst into laughter, and it felt like every uncomfortable moment from the previous weeks had burned away, just smoke dissipating into the night sky. I packed my things to leave that evening, and as we said our goodbyes, I felt a genuine warmth. We shared a group hug, an unspoken agreement that we'd keep fighting for this thing we had, however imperfect. I hoped we'd learn to communicate enough that no one felt left out or diminished again. As I walked back home, under a blanket of stars, I smiled at the thought of what we'd built, a bridge over a tumultuous river instead of letting it swallow us whole. Life might throw more storms our way, but now at least, we had boats together. I resolved to never forget that conversation is magic, and in a world where people often ghost each other over differences, we chose connection instead. As I settled into bed that night, I felt something bittersweet creeping in, an acknowledgement that while we had made progress, we were still a work in progress ourselves. But maybe that was okay, too. We'd navigate this new chapter together, collected not as perfect friends but as imperfect allies in this life, and I was more grateful than ever to be on this journey with them. I never thought sharing a house with 3 other people would lead to such a mess of feelings and moral questions, but here we are. I, a 30-year-old graphic designer, moved in with 2 friends and 1 boyfriend who somehow became part of this tight living situation. Let's call them Sarah, Tom, and Lucas. The dynamic worked most of the time, but when Lucas started getting comfy, I felt a shift. I'd catch him lounging on the couch, flicking through channels and eating our snacks. Sure, he was with Sarah, but it was like the boundaries began to blur between friendship and just having a roommate with coupled privileges. A week ago, Lucas asked if he could borrow my car to go to a job interview he'd been prepping for. Now, usually, I wouldn't mind. I want the guy to succeed. But I'd just spent a fortune on car repairs because my last borrower didn't think a simple flat tire needed more than a can of fix-a-flat. I hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of conflict bearing down on me. Look, I can give you my bike, and it's only a couple of miles to the office, I suggested, trying to be reasonable. He laughed, like I was joking, but my frustration brewed. I didn't think it was fair to risk my car after everything I'd recently put into it. I told him no. The tension in the air was thick as he mulled over my refusal. I could see him processing, disappointment washing over his face, but I held my ground. The day of the interview came, and the moment I stepped out to grab coffee, I saw him pacing in the living room, barely able to contain his anxiety. "Can I at least use the bike?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. My stomach churned. I felt guilty, knowing how badly he wanted this job, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let another person risk my livelihood for a short-term solution to a long-standing worry. "I really can't, Lucas," I replied softly, and I could see the energy in the room dim. When he called me hours later to tell me he missed the interview because he couldn't get there without my car, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that my choice to protect my property had come without troublesome consequences, at least on my end, but guilt because I could practically hear the resignation in his voice. I spent the rest of the day questioning if I was an asshole for prioritizing my car over someone else's future. Should I have been more understanding? As I sat there in a quiet house that night, I realized that life in this house wasn't going to get any clearer, and maybe that was okay. We were all in this nebulous state of budding adulthood, trying to navigate friendships, relationships, and responsibilities. A few days later, Lucas came home and announced he found another interview opportunity, this time without the expectation of using my car. I smiled for him, but it didn't erase the bittersweet taste of how our previous encounter had shaped things. There were a million small choices that made this life complicated, and sometimes, it seemed, the hardest ones were the ones nobody saw. So, maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe I just was someone trying to protect what little I had while hoping everyone else found their way in this messy, expectedly chaotic era of life. As the days blurred into weeks, I watched Lucas navigate the hectic world of job hunting, his determination sometimes leaving me in awe. I'd casually ask him how his applications were going while simultaneously trying to not overstep my boundaries as a roommate. He often consulting his girlfriend, Jess, about the roles he was interested in, their excitement filling the apartment whenever he'd get a call for a phone interview. I couldn't blame him, either. They were young, filled with dreams, and yet, the bitterness from our previous encounter still festered in the background of my mind. I kept replaying that day, the heated exchange, the way my resolve had crumbled as I struggled to stand my ground. Was I selfish for wanting to keep my car safe from wear and tear? For wanting to create a buffer between my possessions and the unpredictable chaos of other people's lives? I found myself wrestling with a kind of guilt that felt inexplicably heavy. It wasn't until one late afternoon, after a grueling day at work engulfed in stress, that it all boiled over again. Jess came home in tears, her mascara smudged, voice cracking as she revealed Lucas hadn't gotten the job he'd pinned all his hopes on. It echoed in the hallway, and my heart sank. I could see Jess's heart shattering, and for a moment, I felt a pang of disdain towards myself. What did I even know about other people's struggles? Day after day, I had cautiously guarded my little world, but at what cost? I was a fortress, standing firm against the emotional weathering of others, and yet, here was proof that sometimes that weather could be brutal. I offered my usual platitudes, "I'm sure something else will come up, and it's not the end of the world," while inwardly questioning if I should have been more supportive. Jess, grabbing a handful of napkins and wiping her tears, looked at me like she was inching closer to needing someone to blame. That flicker in her eyes felt unmistakable, a subtle accusation hiding behind the sorrow. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs as I tried to quell the rising tide of emotions. "I know this is hard, but Lucas gave it his all," I finally said, my heart racing as I dared to speak. Jess nodded, managing a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After she had left to meet Lucas for a pep talk, I sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of my decisions again. It hit me like a freight train. I had made my choices, but it wasn't Lucas or Jess who'd pushed me into this position. I was stuck in that gray space between self-preservation and the need to support friends. Would I always feel like this? The next couple of days were filled with the gentle reminder of life moving forward, despite my tumultuous thoughts. Lucas stayed mostly quiet after his setback, and I wondered if my reluctance to share my car had carved a distance between us that felt harsh and unyielding. Would things have been different if I'd just let him borrow it? Would he have felt less like he was trying to walk a tightrope? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I finally gathered enough courage one evening. "Hey, Lucas," I said, my voice hesitant as he sat at the dining table sifting through job listings, his brows knitted in concentration. "I've been thinking about the car. If you really need it for the next interview, you can use it." He looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude on his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded, both relieved and terrified, feeling an almost physical ache in my gut. "Yeah, I trust you." After a long, pregnant pause, he smiled, a genuine light sparking in his eyes again. "Thanks. I'll be careful, I promise." And just like that, with a simple act, a layer of tension lifted from the apartment. It was as if we had both taken a step forward, not just him, but me too. We had to navigate this chaotic time together, reminding ourselves that sometimes you have to release control to create space for others. I had to let go of the guilt and the fear that I was doing everything wrong. Life, I realized, was messy and unpredictable, but maybe that's what made it worth living. Moments turned to memories, and sometimes, being a little vulnerable along the way was the best way to build the connections that mattered most. I hoped that this new chapter would see us become more than just tenants sharing a roof. Perhaps we could spark a friendship that stood stronger than the steel and rubber of any car. As Lucas prepared for the interview, I hugged the thought of growth tightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism about navigating this messy era that stretched before us. A week passed, and the tension in our apartment began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Lucas was more upbeat, a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. He'd opened up about his experiences in getting to know the companies he was applying to, the kind of exciting roles he envisioned for himself, and I found myself rooting for him, hoping he would land something that truly excited him. There was an early morning when we found ourselves sharing coffee in our mismatched mugs, his chipped blue one, a gift from his mom, and my plain white one. We laughed about the terrible dinners we'd relied on during our school days, the microwavable mac and cheese that tasted like cardboard, and the countless times we learned that cooking was a science best left to someone else. "I seriously thought I'd never get through that phase without burning myself," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair as the sunlight streamed through our tiny kitchen window. And just like that, we were trading stories, our laughter bouncing off the walls where silence had lingered too long. It was refreshing, and I thought to myself, this is how you build friendships, brick by brick, shared moments by shared moments. Then the call came. I was in my room, trying to focus on laundry when Lucas burst through my door, an energy that surged through him so contagious I couldn't help but grin. "I got it," he exclaimed, holding his phone triumphantly aloft like a victory flag. My heart swelled as I registered the joy in his eyes. He was excited about starting this new chapter, and by extension, so was I. There was something undeniably uplifting about watching someone else chase their dreams. But as he filled the space around us with excitement, I felt an all too familiar wave of doubt wash over me. I wondered if I had done enough to support him. Should I have lent him my car despite my hesitations? What if he had shown me just a bit more appreciation? I was conflicted, supporting your friends feels like a slippery slope sometimes, and I had been trying so hard to put myself first. Later that evening, I sat alone on our balcony, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars against the velvet night sky. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the open door while the hum of laughter faintly echoed from inside. Lucas was celebrating with our other roommate, Maria, who had baked a cake for the occasion, chocolate, of course, his favorite. As I listened to their joyous banter, I felt a pang of loneliness creep in. The moment felt profound, a celebration of dreams met with the bittersweet taste of my own insecurities. "I'm here, you know," I murmured to the night, unsure of who I was addressing. Would saying it out loud somehow reaffirm my worth, reclaim my decision? But another part of me echoed the doubts. Would I always prioritize my needs over his? Maybe there was a balance to be found, a compromise that allowed both of us to thrive without sacrificing our own boundaries. That night, after the cake was devoured and the laughter subsided, I finally gathered the courage to open up during one of our late-night talks. "Hey, Lucas," I started carefully, "I'm really proud of you for nailing that interview. But can I be honest?" He leaned in, curious. "I still wonder about that day. I know I seemed like a jerk for not letting you use my car, and I just want you to know. It was hard for me to say no." I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "I get it. It was a tough situation for both of us. You were looking out for yourself, and that's okay. We've all got our own battles, right?" That simple statement illuminated something vital. Self-advocacy was not only allowed but also necessary in a world where everyone tried to balance their dreams against the pressures life handed them. I smiled, a warm surge of relief washing over me. My heart felt lighter, and in that moment, the notion of friendship began to reshape. From roommates to allies, navigating an uncertain world together felt less daunting now. Maybe this chapter would take time to unfold completely, and maybe the past would echo, but beneath it all, we were learning. Not just about each other but about ourselves, about accountability, support, and the nuances of trust. It was an ongoing journey, and while I couldn't predict where it would lead us, this felt like the beginning of something beautiful. So, I took a breath, let the hope settle in, and thought maybe, just maybe, we all could find our way, one step at a time. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, but here I am, staring at my new tattoo, not sure if I'm the hero or the villain of my own story. For the last 2 years, my boyfriend, Jake, and I had been living hand in hand, going through the ups and downs of life together in our tiny one-bedroom apartment. He's the kind of guy who dreams big, and I've always loved that about him. His ambition fuels my own. We talked about engagement frequently, and while I wasn't nagging him, I was starting to feel that itch for a ring that we had sort of agreed on. So, after almost a year of saving up, I had stashed away about $1,000, earmarked specifically for a beautiful engagement ring I had seen in a local shop. The plan was to keep saving until I had enough to take him out to dinner, drop down on one knee, and ask him to be my forever. But then, life happened. Just a few weeks ago, the itch for something permanent became too strong. I had always dreamed of getting a tattoo to commemorate a moment in my life, but never found the right time or design until a sudden burst of inspiration hit me. I wanted to capture a symbol of our journey together, something that could feel like both a celebration and a mark of our commitment. So, on a whim, I walked into a tattoo parlor and dropped that $1,000 on an intricate design of a compass, where we each planned to add our initials to signify that we were each other's direction. The moment the needle hit my skin, I felt exhilarated, a rush that pushed aside any guilt I might have felt. Yet, once the high faded, the guilt settled in heavy. I started envisioning Jake's face when he'd find out, and the thought gnawed at me for days. I could see the disappointment brewing in his eyes, could imagine the way his mouth would drop open slightly in disbelief. When I finally confessed after dinner one night, it didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. His expression went from confusion to frustration, and he snapped out of it with, "You spent our ring money? On a tattoo? Seriously?" It felt like a punch to the gut. As the words hung in the air, I tried to explain my thought process, how this felt like something I had needed for myself in that moment, but he just shook his head. "I just can't believe you chose a tattoo over the future we talked about." His tone was flat, and I felt every bit of anger and disappointment directed at me. I wanted to scream that it was more than just ink, it was a representation of everything we'd built together, but all he could see was the dollars and the broken promise. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with doubt. Part of me was excited about my tattoo, grateful for the way it reminded me of our love, but another part of me felt like I had just sabotaged the best thing I had ever had, The chance to build a life together with the person I adored. Days turned into a week, and the space between us began to feel like an echo of things left unsaid. I wanted to give him time to process, but I also felt the gnawing uncertainty. Had I ruined everything? Did I prioritize a fleeting moment over a lasting commitment? In the end, we had a long conversation a few days later, and Jake surprised me. He admitted he understood my need for self-expression and how significant it was for me, but he still felt cheated out of a moment that meant so much to him. In that moment, I promised him that I'd take on extra shifts to help us save up again for the ring. We both needed to blend our dreams together instead of letting diverging paths fracture the love we had. So, we're still together, still saving, just with a compass tattoo on my forearm and a shared resolve to navigate our way forward. Looking back, I hope I made the right choice, but I guess that's something we're both figuring out together. As I reflect on that moment, lying in bed with the weight of my decision still settling in my heart, I realize how fragile our dreams can feel. The tattoo, a simple compass, represents more than my desire for adventure and my love for the sea. It captures the essence of us, two people charting a course through life, not always aligned on every detail, but willing to navigate the waves together. The next few weeks were a mix of bittersweet emotions. I took on as many extra shifts as I could manage at the cafe, pouring coffee and exchanging pleasantries with customers while my mind often drifted back to the conversation I had with Matt, where he expressed his disappointment so genuinely. Each night, exhausted after long hours, I'd come home to find him nestled on the couch, usually with takeout containers cluttering the coffee table. His face would light up when I walked in, and I'd pretend those little moments, filled with warmth and kindness, were enough to erase the tension from before. One Saturday morning, as I served him pancakes topped with strawberries, I noticed the shadows under his eyes slowly fading. He seemed lighter, and I thought maybe the tattoo had struck a chord with him too. "You know," he said between bites, "it's not just about the ring, right? It's what it symbolizes for us." His gaze was steady, and I felt a rush of warmth realizing we were rebuilding our dreams, step by step. The conversation lingered with me, swirling in my mind through the afternoon as I painted my nails, gazing at the compass. I had adorned a symbol of our navigation, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity that nestled just beneath the surface. I started wondering if I'd ever really be able to save for that ring again. But as weeks turned into months, our shared compromise began to feel like a shared bond. We spoke about potential timelines, future plans, and the kind of life we wanted to build. None of that felt rushed, but rather infused with mutual respect. Matt confided one evening about his own dreams to travel, revealing a longing I hadn't fully seen before. "How about we save for a trip instead? Just you and me, on our own adventure," he said, an expectant grin spread across his face. There was something exhilarating about the idea, pulling us from societal expectations into a realm we could mold together. So, we changed trajectories again, setting aside the engagement ring talk for the moment, focusing instead on our travel fund. The tattoo became an anchor of sorts, reminding us to always return to our true north. It marked a chapter in our relationship, a beautiful reminder of the moment we chose communication over disappointment. Every time I glanced at it, that little compass invoked the promise of exploration, encouraging us to seek out new paths where dreams intertwined. Life moved forward like that, simple yet filled with the unexpected joys of our daily rhythms. Still, a part of me wrestled with the ghost of that elusive engagement ring, now a distant wish rather than an immediate goal. Was I selfish for prioritizing my desires over his expectations? I often questioned it, but then I'd see the look in Matt's eyes when we planned our travel itinerary, the spark of excitement that reminded me that we were figuring this out as we went. Eventually, we took our first trip together, the result of a few months of meticulous budgeting and shared late-night planning sessions that felt far more rewarding than simply swiping a card for impulse buys. As we trekked through the hills of a quaint little town filled with art and adventure, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment wash over me. We hiked to a viewpoint one evening, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I could see in Matt's gaze something deeper than our previous expectations. "You know," he whispered, "if we ever do get engaged, it'll be because we've made this journey together." I nodded, realizing that this path felt right, even if it was not the one I initially thought I was meant to take. The uncertainty still lingered, but it felt safe nestled beside his confidence in our partnership. Now, as I sit here recounting this experience, that small compass on my forearm feels less like a marker of a choice I made on a whim and more like a testament to the beauty of navigating life together. I hope we're making all the right choices, but even if we stumble along the way, I know we'll figure it out side by side. That promise alone is worth more than any ring ever could be. I can't help but smile whenever I catch a glimpse of that compass, its lines etched in ink, a little reminder of the journey we're on. It's funny how something that started as a spontaneous decision transformed into a symbol of our bond. Through countless conversations over takeout dinners and quiet evenings on our cramped couch, it became evident that this wasn't just about the ring or the tattoo, it was about us redefining what commitment truly meant. Sure, there were moments filled with tension. I could still see the flicker of disappointment in Daniel's eyes each time I pulled up my sleeve, revealing my new ink. It wasn't reluctance he felt, it was the shadow of expectations, the weight of what he had imagined for us. But then there were also shared smiles, laughter bubbling up over iced coffee as we scrolled through engagement ring designs online. We increasingly found ourselves dreaming instead about adventures, discussing places we wanted to explore, and traditions we wanted to create. There's something about pooling dreams together that made the prospect of marriage feel closer, more tangible. I even joked that maybe we could just stamp passports with our love story instead of just fingers adorned with gold. Daniel laughed, his brows raised. It was a silly notion, but it was mine, a glimpse into my heart reaching out to him. Weeks turned into months, and while I continued to take on extra shifts, we also began mapping out our game plan. What if we saved just a little more for a trip next summer? I proposed one evening as we spread out a world map on the floor, filled with pinned locations and scribbled notes. To my delight, he spotted a little island off the coast of Thailand, and he was enthralled. We could watch the sunrise from the beach, just us and the horizon, he said, eyes sparkling, and in that moment, I saw not just a vision but a promise, a different kind of engagement. But there were still doubts that crept in like unwelcome guests. What if we never made it to that ring? What if life took us down a path that wasn't supposed to include marriage? I often found myself oscillating between exhilaration for the adventure we were shaping and fear that, in the end, it wouldn't be enough. So, I shared these misgivings with Daniel one night. Sitting by our flickering living room lamp, I admitted how I feared being seen as the one who diverted our course, the root of any uncertainty that lay ahead. What if you wanted that ring more than anything, and I've messed it all up? The vulnerability of my confession hung in the air, settling deep within us both. He took my hand, his touch steady and reassuring. You didn't mess anything up. We're being real about what we want, and that's powerful. Sometimes it's okay to step outside the script we've been given and write our own. His words washed over me, soothing the anxiety that had coiled tightly in my chest. In many ways, that moment defined our relationship. It was about honoring each other's dreams without losing sight of our own. As time passed, that tattoo began to feel more like home to me, a compass pointing towards our aspirations, guiding us forward in harmony. Each time I felt lost or anxious, I'd glance at my forearm as if the compass were whispering that I was on the right path. And so we continued our journey, both separately chasing individual dreams and together weaving a shared tapestry of experiences we could cherish. Life was unpredictable, but we embraced it, aware that every twist and turn only deepened our connection. In the end, as our next anniversary approached, we decided to take a staycation, just an escape into each other's company without the weight of the world pressing upon us. I couldn't help but wonder what the future had in store. Would we still be dreaming of that ring next year? Would we even want it anymore? We were slowly rewriting what love and commitment meant to us, and isn't that what truly matters? I realize now that life isn't about perfect paths, it's about the journey we carve out, and I'm grateful for every bump along the road, tattooed compass and all. I still can't say for sure whether deferring the ring was the right choice, but I often see the compass as a metaphor for us, navigating together, steering clear of the shallow and unnecessary, and embracing the depth of our evolving love story. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers right now. I trust that with Daniel by my side, every step we take will be a step worth taking, each choice reflecting who we truly are, together. When my 15-year-old daughter, Ava, first came to me with that furrowed brow and almost conspiratorial tone, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical "can we order pizza for dinner" conversation. She was scrolling through her phone, tapping the screen as if the device held the answers to life's most pressing questions. "Mom, you remember Karen from school? The one with the weird lunchbox obsession?" I chuckled, that visual of Karen's floral patterned lunch pail making me smile. "Of course. What about her?" Ava bit her lip, glancing sideways as if she feared someone might overhear us. I took a seat next to her on the couch, concerned but trying to maintain an air of casual curiosity. "Well, she said her mom gets into their group chat and reads everything they talk about. Is that normal?" The question landed with a weight I hadn't expected. I felt a rush of emotions: protectiveness, confusion, indignation. "That doesn't seem right, sweetie," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Ava's eyes sparkled with relief, but I could see the worry churning behind them. "Do you really think it's weird?" she pressed, and I knew she was grappling with her allegiance to a friend versus her instinct to be kind. "I mean, if these girls can't even speak freely in their own chat, what's the point?" I gestured vaguely, struggling to put my thoughts into words. "I get that parents want to protect their kids, but reading their conversations? That feels invasive." Ava nodded, her shoulders relaxing a bit, but doubt lingered in her gaze. The more we talked, the more I could sense the bond between Ava and her friends was rooted in trust, something that this other mom was potentially undermining. We spent the afternoon discussing the nuances of friendships and boundaries, each point of conversation fueling my desire to protect my daughter while also helping her navigate this new social landscape. Yet, things grew tense when I decided to express my thoughts to Ava about how I felt Karen's mom was crossing a line. What if Mrs. Thompson finds something embarrassing? Or uses it against them later? I said, the words swallowing the air between us. But just then, Ava's face twisted into one of apprehension, and she said something that made my heart clench. "But what if she's just trying to be safe, Mom?" I could feel the pendulum of my parenting philosophy swinging. Was I being too harsh? Too aggressive in my stance against someone who might actually be trying to look out for her daughter? As our discussion continued, a nagging voice in the back of my head whispered that I might be a bit too protective, but deep down, I just couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between girls was being eroded by that thin screen of parental oversight. My heart was worn from this emotional tug-of-war, balancing between supporting comfort and advocating for separation. In the coming weeks, Ava decided to share her thoughts with Karen, but that confrontation didn't end well. I could see the stress gnawing at my daughter, somewhere between the line she wanted to walk as a good friend and the line I thought was essential to take as a protector. When their friendship seemed to wane, with Karen taking it to a new level of loyalty to her mom, Ava became frustrated and hurt, returning to me with her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I hugged her, rubbing her back softly, forcing myself to set aside my anxiety about Karen's home life. "You're not responsible for their choices," I said. "But you can always choose to do what feels right for you." Slowly, I watched as she emerged from that cocoon of unease, taking ownership of her feelings and distancing herself from the unhealthy dynamics. Then I grew even more bewildered when Mrs. Thompson texted me a week later. I could almost hear the smugness radiating through her words as she asked if I would like to talk about our daughter's friendship. I took a moment to breathe, staring at the text on my phone, heart racing as I contemplated what sort of conversation was about to ensue. And as I teetered at the edge of familiarity and unease, I felt that surge of protective energy rise, breeding uncertainty in my own thoughts. As the days unfolded, I eventually responded but could not shake the thought of how easily the world of social media can turn even the simplest of friendships into a battleground for trust and loyalty, wondering if everything we once cherished about growing up together was now battered by screens. I'm still pondering that lunchbox scenario and how, in a world where connection should build kids up, it sometimes seems to cripple them with distrust, leaving me caught between the expectations of a good friend and a watchful mother. Maybe I'm justified in thinking the mom is overstepping, or perhaps I'm simply going to be judged as the overprotective parent. Who really knows? But there's one thing I've learned: navigating the painful waters of adolescence is no easy feat, and daughters need to feel heard, not just as children in my eyes, but as young women finding their place in a complicated world. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh cut grass wafting through the open kitchen window, a stark contrast to the swirling thoughts in my mind. I watched my daughter, Lily, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by her colorful art supplies, her brow furrowed as she painstakingly crafted something out of paper and glue. Every piece she created was a glimpse into her inner world, and I feared that whatever she sensed about her friend's mom might dim that vibrant spark if she felt I wasn't on her side. "Mom?" Lily's voice broke through my reverie, startling me back into the moment. "Can we take a break? I'm feeling sort of weird." There it was again, that word. I set down my coffee and sat beside her, the warmth of her small frame pressing against me. "Weird like what?" I asked gently, trying to mask my own unease. "Weird like, how can Mrs. Thompson see what I'm saying too? Julia?" She didn't meet my eyes, clearly wrestling with the heavy thoughts behind her youthful gaze. "It's like, it's not just happens, you know? Like, I feel like I can't say, like, anything without her reading it. It's just weird." I felt a pang of protectiveness and pride wash over me at her articulation. It was one of those moments where you realize your child is becoming more than just your little girl. She's a thinker, a person shaped by her experiences. "You're not crazy for feeling that way, Lily," I said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's okay to want privacy. It's okay to think it's weird." But even as the words left my mouth, a flicker of doubt ignited within me. Was I feeding into something that might later just amplify her insecurities? "What if your friend's mom just wants to keep her safe?" I asked, trying to present both sides, but I could hear the hesitation in my own tone. "That doesn't mean she can't trust us," Lily replied assertively, her eyes finally locking onto mine. "It feels like she thinks we're kids who can't handle stuff ourselves." There it was, the essence of her turmoil, a tangle of trust and reliance on friendship that felt too heavy for her small shoulders. I could sense the confusion radiating from her, and it twisted my stomach like a pretzel. I remembered how I'd always felt like I had to earn my independence from my own parents, how every safety net often felt like a straitjacket. But did that make me the bad guy if I stood firm in supporting her feelings? "Do you want to talk to her?" I offered, though fear crept in, imagining how that conversation would unfold. "Like, get her to tell Mrs. Thompson that she's weirded out?" I finished for her, smiling despite the tension. "Yeah, kinda." The laughter vanished as quickly as it had arrived, and uncertainty took its place. "Maybe we should talk, just the two of us," I suggested lightly. "Let's figure this out together." A determined look crossed Lily's face, her little chin jutting out in a way that reminded me far too much of myself. We dove into a conversation about boundaries, respect, and what it meant to communicate with support instead of judgment. It was refreshing and occasionally painful as the truth emerged. I realized that while I feared the overstepping of others, I also needed to make sure that I didn't suffocate her with my instinctual desire to shield her from everything. Together, we navigated it all, her comfort with what she wanted to say to Julia, a response that felt empowering, that reinforced her independence while still letting her know I had her back. After a few fidgety moments of brainstorming, she finally scribbled something down. "Hey, I feel funny about Mrs. Thompson reading our chats. Can you just ask her?" Just then, a certain sense of ease washed over me. The hard discussions create better dialogue, spacing in the struggle of raising a child who will someday be an adult. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right to let her lead the conversation when it came to matters so close to her heart. In the days that followed, I kept an eye on Lily during her interactions with Julia, hoping she would find the strength to voice her feelings. I learned that sometimes being a support means just standing back and watching, trusting that she would figure out her path, confident as she spreads her wings. Then, one afternoon, after feedback from Julia that seemed to empower her, Lily bounded into the house with a beaming smile. "You know what? We talked to Mrs. Thompson," she said, nearly jumping with pride. "And guess what? She apologized and said she didn't mean to make us uncomfortable. We can friend chat without her snooping." I felt a flood of relief crashing through me at her words, but somewhere, beneath that joy, I was fully aware that this wouldn't be the last battle she faced. This journey was just beginning, one filled with hurdles, lessons, and maybe some minor catastrophes along the way. But if she could open herself to conversation, if I could help her learn to navigate her emotions, then maybe we both would come out stronger on the other side. And in this tangled, beautiful mess of adolescence, perhaps I wouldn't be the antagonist, just another parent, doing my best, together. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, the open window letting in a gentle breeze, carrying with it the scent of blooming lilacs from our backyard. My daughter, Mia, was busily assembling her homework, papers strewn across the table, colored pens creating a small rainbow of doodles surrounding an unfinished math worksheet. I watched her work, occasionally glancing up at her with a sense of pride mixed with the lingering worry that had settled like a stone in my stomach. I had fought back tears earlier when she had finally opened up about her friend Sophia's mom and her invasive messages, but seeing Mia engrossed in her assignments now made me realize just how vital these moments of trust and connection were. "Hey, Mia," I finally said softly, shifting the dynamics in our busy little space. "You know I'm always here to talk, right?" She looked up, her eyes focused and clear, even if the small furrow in her brow suggested she was still digesting our earlier conversation. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her voice a little tentative. "But I don't want to be that kid whose mom is always breathing down her neck." There it was, her adolescent anxiety surfacing again, and just like that, layers of complexity deepened my understanding of her world. I took a breath, letting my words flow out with as much clarity and kindness as I could muster. I get that. I don't want to be that parent either. The world's big and a little scary sometimes. We need each other's backs more than ever now. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Then her focus shifted to her phone on the table, a faint shadow crossing her forehead. But my friends think I'm a freak for thinking it's weird that Sophia's mom goes through our chats. It feels like, I don't know. It's like no one cares about boundaries. The ache in my heart twinged again, knowing how peer pressure can sometimes loom larger than any parent's voice. Well, boundaries matter, sweetheart. They help define us. It's okay to feel unsettled about it. It just feels so unfair. Her voice cracked slightly, revealing an unexpected emotional vulnerability. Like, how do I say something without sounding ungrateful? I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We were treading on complex ground, this landscape of friendship mixed with loyalty, respect, and the innocent desire for connection. I remembered my own childhood, the swirl of emotions, confusion stemming from wanting to fit in, yet feeling lost in the process. You know, sometimes it's hard. Standing up for yourself can feel lonely, and that's okay. But your feelings are real, and they deserve to be expressed. The sincerity in my voice seemed to spark something in her. Mia began to speak, her chatter weaving in and out like the gentle breeze outside, filled with vibrant stories about her friends, about school, and how complicated it felt when everyone had opinions about everything. As she spoke, I saw her world slowly transform into colors, imagery that reflected what her heart had been silently wrestling with all along. After a while, I set the dishes aside, and we fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that felt shared rather than empty. It was then that the reality of our conversation resurfaced. Do you think I should talk to Sophia directly about it? She asked, her voice betraying an uncertain hope. I let the question hang for a moment, nudging aside my protective instincts. Only if you feel ready, Mia. Approach it with honesty. You're not trying to hurt her, it's your boundary. And if she respects you, it'll strengthen your friendship. That small ember of reassurance lit up her expression, and I could almost see the gears quietly turning in her mind, testing this new approach. Just as I was about to say something further, my phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Mia's school about their upcoming social studies project. Right when you're finding your voice, I mused aloud, more chaos. Isn't that always the way? She laughed, the kind of chain reaction laughter that felt like a release. Welcome to my life. As I watched her dive back into her assignments, I felt waves of optimism crashing against the rocks of that fear I had been grappling with. Perhaps it was silly to think that every conversation would solve every problem. But we were in this together, just a pair of players in the chaotic game of life, navigating through the highs and lows. The world was indeed filled with hurdles, but as long as we kept talking, even when fear made it hard, I knew we'd emerge okay, together, every step of the way. Over the days and weeks that followed, Mia did muster the courage to approach Sophia, and while it wasn't perfect, it opened avenues for dialogue that surprised both of them. I felt some weight ease off my shoulders as I realized, this journey of parenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence, being there for each other as we navigate life together. And maybe, just maybe, my voice wouldn't be an impediment, it would be the bridge through the messiness of growing up. It was a Friday night when everything spiraled out of control. My roommates had left for the weekend, and I was finally looking forward to a little alone time with a guy I had been seeing for a few weeks, Jake. We'd been texting like teenagers, and deciding to have him over felt both thrilling and slightly reckless. The rain was pouring outside, creating a cozy atmosphere, and all I could think about was how nice it would be to watch a movie and share some popcorn together. But as the night unfolded, I realized I was in for more than I bargained for. Just as we settled down on the couch, the mood lit by soft lighting and the faint sound of raindrops hitting the window, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my roommate, Melissa, who had gone home to her mom's place. At first, I shrugged it off, but when I glanced at the message, my heart sank. Hey, can you keep it down? My mom is trying to sleep. I thought about responding to reassure her, but then Jake leaned closer, and I forgot about my phone altogether. The dialogue in front of us faded as tension filled the air, and it wasn't long before we were lost in each other. Just as the movie played on, laughter erupted from me, followed by Jake's playful remarks. That's when it happened. 3 loud, furious knocks pounded at my door, punctuated by the unmistakable voice of Melissa's mom, "Shut the fuck up." It was an implosion of shock. I froze, wild thoughts racing through my mind. Did she really just pound on my door? In my apartment? I glanced at Jake, who looked just as startled, and for a moment, we exchanged looks, an unspoken mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't want to open the door, but I also felt weirdly obligated to address what had just happened. I took a deep breath, my cheeks heating up as I approached the door. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting it to be my imagination, but she was there, arms crossed and a scowl that could scare a bear. Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions stirring inside me. "This is my apartment, and I'd appreciate a little respect." But instead of backing off, she banged harder, "You shouldn't be so loud. Think of others." There was an immediate tension in the air, thick enough to cut. I was furious but also flustered and embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was to be in a standoff with my roommate's mom. "I'm sorry, we'll keep it down," I replied, the words feeling like defeat. Jake shifted awkwardly behind me, and I felt myself shrinking, like a child caught misbehaving. When her footsteps faded away, I turned back to Jake, my cheeks still burning. "I can't believe that just happened," I said, my voice barely a whisper, feeling both humiliated and annoyed. "Yeah, that was intense," Jake replied, trying to lighten the mood with a crooked smile. But I couldn't shake off my embarrassment. "Do you think I'm the asshole here?" I asked, half joking but deep down, feeling the weight of her words. "I mean, it's our space." But then again, I didn't think about how loud we were being. Jake shrugged, "I think she overreacted. Just because she doesn't want to hear you having fun doesn't mean you should have to hide." I nodded, feeling a little comforted, but I couldn't escape the swirl of mixed emotions. As the night continued, it was hard to focus on anything else. The initial excitement had fizzled into a mix of anxiety and self-doubt. What if Melissa felt the same way? What if I really was the problem? After he left, I collapsed onto my bed, the night replaying in my head like a broken record. Should I write to Melissa and apologize, or would that just confirm I was in the wrong? Was I really the one who'd crossed a line here? In the days that followed, I spent a considerable amount of time lost in a loop of whether or not I should approach Melissa about it again. Part of me felt defensive. It was my home, after all, but then again, I didn't want to create unnecessary tension between us. Eventually, I did reach out. "Hey, can we chat? I'm sorry if we were too loud the other night," I typed out. I watched the three little dots dance as she typed back, my anxiety bubbling. "It's fine. Mom just gets like that sometimes. Thanks for saying something." The relief washed over me, but this lingering question hung in the air: was I truly wrong to let loose in my own space? In the end, it didn't seem to matter as much. I learned that sometimes, even in your home, you have to navigate the constant balancing act of respect and personal freedom. And that's just life, finding that middle ground between living fiercely and being considerate. Even if it took a knock on the door from Melissa's mom to figure it out, it was a lesson learned. It was a couple of weeks later when the whole scenario faded into a distant memory, tucked neatly alongside other college mishaps. I was mostly back to my routine, classes, work, the occasional movie night with roommates. But every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting another unexpected visitor. It wasn't that my roommate's mom was a regular fixture in our lives, but that incident had a way of imprinting itself, a reminder that boundaries could be so easily crossed. One evening, I had finally decided to treat myself and unwind with a glass of cheap wine and that new show everyone was raving about. I remember feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle comfortably in my stomach as the credits rolled. The apartment was quieter than usual, the hum of the refrigerator a soft backdrop to my thoughts, and I couldn't resist the urge to kick back and binge watch. Just as I was sinking into the couch, a message pinged on my phone. It was Melissa, my roommate, asking if I could give her a ride to the grocery store. I noticed the clock, it was nearing 10 p.m. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my desire to relax undisturbed and wanting to be a good roommate. Opting for the latter, I texted back. "Sure. Just let me finish this episode." Melissa's response was quick, clearly eager. "Thanks. I'll be ready in 15. As I tossed my phone onto the couch, I found myself smirking at the irony of the situation. The last time I'd had a guy over, it hadn't gone great, but here I was, willingly putting on my altruistic hat and totally ignoring that nagging voice in my head. 15 minutes later, I was in the one car we had shared, parked in the grocery store lot surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights. Melissa climbed in, a flurry of movement with her purse and a list that she waved enthusiastically in front of my face. "I made a plan this time. We won't end up with 8 boxes of cereal," I chuckled, appreciating her diligent efforts to keep our fridge alive. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice how her mood had shifted over the last few weeks. Melissa seemed lighter, happier, maybe it was just the thrill of independence or a deeper realization about her own boundaries. Either way, it was nice to see her so animated, and it started to tug at my heart a little, reminding me she was a good friend, despite her mom's overly assertive parenting style. The atmosphere in the car buzzed with easy conversations about mundane things, classes, parties, the ever-growing stack of laundry that awaited both us at home. But as we turned off the lively street into the quieter residential neighborhood, I felt a pang of anxiety mingle with the lightness. I didn't want to navigate any emotional heaviness tonight. Just as I was thinking about the general awfulness of adulting, Melissa's phone buzzed. I could see her mumble, "Oh, it's my mom," as she clicked on the message. "What does she want?" I asked, half joking. Melissa promptly rolled her eyes, but her expression shifted. "Oh. I think she's asking why I haven't returned home yet." I smirked, ready to tease her about being grown, but caught myself. She had been assertively carving out her own space lately, even splurging on new clothes and ditching old habits she no longer wanted. That confidence felt contagious, but instantly, I felt twinges of guilt for my own behavior. Did I have a moment to share the living fiercely lesson I'd learned? Or was I just biding my time until my own surface changed? As we entered the store, I tried to shake off the creeping sensation. Eventually, Melissa and I fell into our usual routine, scanning the aisles for snacks and sharing our dietary sins with each other. A rhythm, a comfort. Somewhere around the frozen foods, we heard a commotion. I glanced back towards the entrance, wrinkling my brow. A man standing outside the store was clearly trying to get someone's attention, waving his arms like a conductor. I didn't think much of it, but Melissa paused mid-sentence and stared, an expression of recognition washing over her face. "Oh no," she muttered. "It's my mom." I turned and sure enough, there was her mom, hands on her hips, staring at the man as if he might turn into a pumpkin at midnight. My heart sank a bit for Melissa. The last thing you want is your mother circling like a hawk on your coattails. Just as I was contemplating our escape route, her mom finally saw us. It was like those moments in bad sitcoms where the planet stops spinning, and every character locks eyes in slow motion. "Melissa, I was looking for you," she shouted, her voice ricocheting off the store walls. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement of solidarity. I could only imagine what was coming. As her mom marched toward us with purpose, I debated whether I should vanish into the cereal aisle or just face the impending storm. "Mom, it's fine. We're just shopping," Melissa chimed, but her mom wasn't having it. She wasted no time pointing an accusatory finger at the guy outside. "You can't let some stranger talk you into late-night runs, Melissa." It struck me like a bolt of lightning. Melissa shrank a little before her mom's fierce gaze. I could see the conflict dance in her eyes, loyalty to her upbringing versus the newfound freedom she was still testing out. What was I supposed to do? I stood there, feeling like a spectator to a complex play where the spoilers had all been handed out, but I was still in the audience. It felt all too familiar, this crossroad between childhood and adult independence. "I think you should apologize," her mom continued, her voice strained yet firm, but I observed a flicker of uncertainty in Melissa's eyes. The lessons learnt came rushing back to me, and I found myself taking a slow breath. I couldn't intervene directly, that would only throw fuel on the fire, but I wanted to help, to be part of her process of establishing that line she needed, just like I was doing for myself. Or maybe we're both allowed to navigate our own choices, Mom? I found myself saying, my heart racing. It felt awkward to speak up but somehow necessary. The tension in the air turned thick as her mom's expression shifted sharply in my direction, sudden recognition. "You too, huh? What a fun way to confuse the adults." She huffed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief intermingling in her expression. But there was something more, maybe an inkling of understanding that she wasn't the only one learning here. And just like that, I felt Melissa at my side, her posture straightening ever so slightly, emboldened to confront this moment. That nothingness between all of us had shifted, and as we stood there, I sensed the space for a dialogue, a chance to redefine it rather than simply acquiesce. All I could think was how beautifully human it was to navigate those turbulent waters together. As the conversation pivoted slowly but surely, it felt less like a scolding and more like a chance for both Melissa and her mom to meet halfway. The anxiety washed away, leaving behind a glimmer of hope for growth. Later that night, we returned home, our bags of supplies in tow. Melissa turned to me, beaming. "That was kind of you, by the way." I shrugged it off. But inside, I felt a swell of pride. I figured it had taken more than a knock at my door to find that balance, but wasn't that the real point? And as I settled on the couch again, wrapped in a familiar blanket, I recognized that sometimes life does require navigating a complex dance between assertiveness and empathy. Even if no one got the perfect score, we were all learning together, step by awkward step. As I settled into that well-worn couch, the remnants of our chaotic evening danced in my mind like strobe lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, "THX for being cool today. Want to finish that movie?" I glanced at the clock, midnight, but the couch was calling me. I tapped back, absolutely, feeling a warmth in my chest that relaxed the tension from earlier. I couldn't help but smile. The door incident had transformed from an awkward moment into something almost bonding. Melissa had a way of making even the most uncomfortable situations seem light. As she walked back into the room, tossing her hair over her shoulder and plopping down next to me, I felt grateful for her presence. We fired up the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to that knock on the door. What if I'd reacted differently? I could have stood my ground, thrown a snarky comment back at her mom. Yet, something in me knew that wouldn't have ended well. It's funny how an impulsive night can morph into a reflective conversation. Between whirs of the DVD player and the intimate glow of the TV, I pondered our little family of sorts, this quirky motley crew we had become. As the movie played, I peeked over at Melissa, who was completely absorbed in the film. I used to think of her as just a roommate, but through shared moments like these, she had become something deeper, a friend. I realized maybe we were all a bit like that, a collection of awkward encounters stitched together by our attempts to understand each other. Halfway through the film, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face dropping slightly. That flutter of concern pulled me out of the fictional world we'd trapped ourselves in. "It's my mom," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I'd better take this." I nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of protectiveness wash over me. I didn't want any more drama tonight. I listened to her side of the conversation, the commendable sonorous tone she adopted to reassure her mom. A few minutes later, she returned, her smile forced. "Just a little concerned about me, you know how it is." "But I told her I'm fine," she added, her expression softening. We settled back into our movie, but I could tell it affected her. "Do you ever feel like you have to keep convincing people you're okay, even when you're perfectly fine?" I asked, trying to understand the weight of her burden. Melissa glanced at me, her eyes dancing with surprise. "All the time. It's exhausting, especially when you're just trying to enjoy life." We shared a silence, each lost in our thoughts, resonating in the unspoken understanding of what it meant to live under the expectations of others. After what felt like an eternity wrapped in our shared silences, she finally muttered, "Thanks for being chill today. It means a lot now." "Yeah, well, some days I stumble less than others," I replied with a hint of laughter, hoping to lighten the mood as the movie credits began to roll. The laughter felt comforting, a reminder of why I cherished these moments, even those tempered by uncomfortable knocks on the door. After the movie ended, we fell into our usual routine of chatting about the plot and debating character choices, but beneath that light-hearted conversation lingered a seriousness. I could sense the flickers of realization in the air, that we were learning how to coexist, showing consideration for each other's vulnerabilities while carving out our spaces. The night wore on, the world outside growing quiet, but inside our apartment, life pulsed with potential and vulnerability, reminding me that this space belonged to all of us. The lessons we absorbed weren't just individual, they were shared, and we were better for it. I mused on this balance we were gradually discovering, an intricate dance, and perhaps that constant, uneasy rhythm was what made life richer. As I nestled deeper into my blanket, the shadows of our earlier chaos turned to whispers of understanding. Sure, boundaries and respect were important, but what really mattered was the effort to bridge those gaps. Reflecting on our interactions, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about what tomorrow would bring, knowing that in our struggles to meet in the middle, we found something profoundly human: connection. I drifted off, the faint sounds of laughter lingering in my ears, hopeful for whatever adventures lay ahead.